in a way, coming of private sector, has been allowed to come as an active player in the Indian economy. And this has raised the question, and very serious question, in fact, of business ethics and corporate social responsibility. And some of you might have noted, who are interested in Indian polity and economy, that recently the government of India has passed legislation regarding corporate social responsibility. How does the private sector function? That's a question which is being raised increasingly. Despite opposition by the private corporate sector, this particular act was passed through a legislation by asking the corporate to spare 2% of their profits for the public good. Now, this is a thing which has been by and large opposed by the corporate. But besides this, I think the basic point is the kind of changes which have occurred, particularly the macro-structural changes, which have been somewhat rapid and effective right after independence. But the micro-level desired consequences have not been so effective, and this is how there has been some kind of a lack of correspondence between the macro-structural legislations and innovations and the delivery at the ground level. Now, several factors have been pointed out about this incongruence, and particularly the bottlenecks which come in the modernization of India. This was pointed out in 60s and 70s, that caste, religion, joint families were not antithetical to development and change, but then there was another group of scholars, and particularly Gunnar Myrdal, who wrote Asian Drama, a monumental work in 3 volumes, and he said there were bottlenecks in modernization. On the other hand, some scholars argued that there was not antithetical relationship between India's social structure, particularly caste, religion, and joint family, and modernization or industrialization. Recently, debate has acquired a new form with the idea of development as freedom, and particularly argued by one of our top-ranking social scientists, Amartya Sen, and he says that freedom is social, and social means social opportunity, and freedom also implies choice for individuals. Now, Sen talks of a deep complementarity between individual agency and social arrangements, and social arrangements would imply the available opportunity to the people. Now, freedom, according to Sen, is achievement, and unfreedom is inequality. Now, I think this point has been generally well taken in by the academic community in India, and one of the reasons is that that capital in India, capital in a specific sense, is being, one form of a capital is being transformed into other form of capital, whether it's political, from political to social, or economy, or from economic to social, political, cultural. I think this transformation is something which needs to be taken into consideration. And there are, at least in my humble opinion, there are 3 factors which have frustrated most of our reforms, legislations and movements. And one is casteism. I'm not talking of caste as a system, but casteism, use of caste for specific discrete, interests. And the other, I think, is gendering. Almost, that is keeping the divide very clearly between men and women. And the third is that there are marginals who do not have much say in the affairs of the country, in decision making in particular. Now, casteism is used, as we know, in elections and in some kind of superimposed dictates. There are instances of how caste suddenly becomes active and then takes certain actions which go against, generally speaking, against the constitution, against law of the land, and so on and so forth. And similarly, gendering, as I said, is an important factor or a bottleneck. Female region or gender regimes, whether it's a work situation, whether it is the jobs, or whether it's a work division of labor in the family, at all different levels this continues to be there. And with regard to marginality, I would say that one could see very clearly in Indian society the two poles, that those who are at the top and those who are at the bottom. Certainly there is the middle level also, and sometimes we refer that our middle class has grown up to the 30% of the total population. Now, how this divide is there? I think three factors in our case have contributed to this divide. Education is one, caste and class. I think, and these three in some way or other create dominants and marginals. I think one of our very well-known scholars, historian, Ramchandra Guha, wrote a very famous book recently, India After Gandhi, and he refers that in modern India, four categories of people or four entities have to be identified. One, what he calls the rights, who enjoy rights and who are deprived of exercising their rights, which are in the constitution, which are the legal enactments, and then rights, the communal rights particularly refers to, and also rights between the communities. And the third is the rulers who dominate, who take the decisions and who deprive others, and then finally the rich people, the rich and the poor. And this divide, I think these divides are there, and probably because of these four R's, India did have growth, considerable growth in the last decade, and despite that, probably this could not be translated properly into development. Now, and this has raised several questions, that what for growth, why growth, for whom growth? Now these questions, therefore questions have been raised about the growth rate, about social justice, about empowerment, and then related questions are relating to unemployment, cost of living, corruption and crime. I think these are the factors which are being discussed now intensely, and probably the blame goes to, in the opinion of large number of intellectual scholars, weak state, and probably India is now being acknowledged as a service providing state rather than developing its own infrastructure, a kind of a dependent economy. And probably there is also a feeling that there is crisis of governability. And now the question is, who governs India? The capitalists, the politicians, the bureaucrats, the intellectuals, all these questions come up because of this kind of a crisis. Now, certainly, if you look at our polity, some individuals, families, clans, and small groups of people probably rule the country. And probably we do not have the same groups of people asking for the share from the state's resources as we had in 70s, 60s, 80s. There are new demand groups, and these new demand groups could be seen in terms of these individuals, families, caste, class, etc. Now, therefore, the questions are, what is development today we have in India? Just 5 minutes. Okay, thank you. And whose development? Who have given a particular direction to our development? Now, therefore, the question is about the nature of philosophy, truth, and practice of social justice. What is just society? This question is not a new question. Several times it has been raised after independence. What is the desired type of society? Which are the political parties and groups which are seeking justice for particular caste groups or communities, and why they are doing so? I mean, these are the questions. Therefore, because a good society, in I would say, in conceptually speaking, enshrines citizenship with rights and dignity. And probably in such a society, there should be a space, enough space for civil society. Probably this is something we have to think about. Empowerment is something which is certainly can be cultural, political, economic, etc. But it implies equality. with entrance sections of society. Now, actual access and accessibility, capability for everyone is a crude yardstick of empowerment. Now, the question we ask often is, do we have it? We do not have. The answer is, why? Because we have alienation, exclusion, and non-participation of a large section of the society, and probably they are not empowered. They do not have capability, and therefore we have today not the traditional categories to understand Indian society and polity. Only we have to think of new categories, new entities, maybe rich and poor, maybe strong and weak, maybe powerful and powerless, maybe resourceful and resourceless, as major dichotomies or divisions in Indian society. And probably, but this does not mean that the traditional antinomies do not persist. And side by side, the caste divisions surface sometimes, and also the religious entities function in given situations. Now, 66 resident billionaires control more than a fifth of the country's GDP. In 1950s and 60s, I think 13% of the India's wealth was controlled by one community known as the Marwadis in India. And now in India, capital is 3 times more concentrated than in the US. And the concentration of wealth and poverty has certainly slightly declined. Infant mortality has also been somewhat less. Undernourishment is less compared to what we had earlier, but then ill health continues to be there. Now, who are the people who are suffering from malnutrition or infant mortality? And probably 2/3 of all government subsidies for food, fuel, electricity are taken away by the rich farmers. Now, therefore, health and education come in private sector, and probably this also is depriving the poor from having access to the better facilities, and probably the government public health institutions or educational institutions are not providing the same quality of education and health care. Now, therefore, now last point, which I will take just 2 minutes more. Now, what is the image of India? That's the question, I think, which is necessary to ask. A romantic image, which foreigners and Westerners and others have,